This week on the Eldritch Lorecast,
lycanthropes will be monstrosities.
Someone here may have been going through the Monster Hunter to make some changes based on that.
We still need alignment on monster stat blocks.
An imperfect thing to use as a mechanic that creates amazing role-playing moments.
Except when it doesn't.
You need to be at least a little bit of a sicko who loves having terrible things happen to your character.
Right on, D&D Beyond, Wizards, something that you've communicated to each other is working.
Especially if you're playing a war game, which if you're playing D&D, you're not playing a war game.
All of that and more right now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms. That's right, you've made it to #1. And if this is your first time listening and that's not worth a like, I don't know what is. You can just pop it down there in the little Facebook thing, or maybe it's worth 5 stars. I don't know if you're listening on an app that allows that. My name's Ben Byrne, by the way. You probably need that if this is your first time listening. And I am joined, as always, every episode, without a miss, by James Hake, Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin.
You had to name me first, didn't you?
Well, it's the first one that popped into my head
He's
after
calling you out.
made the announcement. I have a question for all three of you. And this is kind of a voting question, because after last week's episode where we discussed the new monster manual and the appearance of more diversity in the genders of certain monsters, particularly things like incubi, succubi, satyrs, things like that, alternate names for the medusa started coming out of the woodwork. They were in the YouTube comments. People were shouting them at me on the street. Got a couple of drive-by male equivalent medusas. And I want to know which is the best one. So starting with, at the top...
I'm putting in my bet for Mandusa.
That was number one! That was literally number one. Mandusa, do we like it? Say aye to vote for Mandusa as the best.
That may actually be the best, sadly. But
yeah, what are we doing? Are we doing a cheerometer? What is this?
Yeah.
I was thinking cheerometer, but you're right. Maybe we hear them all and then we decide. All right, Mandusa, number one. Number two, Meduse his.
Oh.
As opposed to Meduse her. Sorry, Tori. I told you it wasn't going to go well. The next one.
Oh, in that case, it was great.
It was great. Medusa.
Oh.
No, don't give them that.
That preserves the essence of the original the best so far, I think.
Oh, then if that's what you're looking for, James, you're going to love this one, because this is my personal favorite. The Medusa.
Oh.
Just imagine a little top hat with the snakes coming out from underneath. Little barbershop moustache.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's it. Sorry. I was like, I'll take your silence as agreeing, so that's the best one.
Is there a British accent that could reasonably pronounce Medusa as Medusa?
Medusa. Was that? I don't know. I don't know if one word.
I
really
think there's an
captures the
Australian
British
accent that could do it.
Medusa.
Medusa. Maddie. That's what we'd call her.
Does anyone remember previous editions where there was actually a male Medusa called the Madar?
No.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, go back. Each of the
Dael's
editions, first, second, third, and fourth, had the Madar, which they changed over time, but they were generally all male, did not have snaky hair. In fact, they were very stony-like in appearance, and they could turn people from stone to flesh. And they would often serve Medusae in a way that would, you turn them to stone. Well, we need to talk to them, or we need to eat them. So let's turn them back to flesh.
I always think it's really funny, this instinct we got to find a masculine version of it. Because, it makes some level of sense with something like a mermaid, where it's like, sure, in English, the word maid is a gendered word. And so if someone wants to find a gendered equivalent for masculine, sure, they're going to look for a different thing for mermaid. But with Medusa, it's just so funny to me, because it's always like, it's not okay.
I mean,
you heard it here first. It's not okay. It is not okay, period.
And then you have the mythology buffs who come in and they're like, well, it's not actually the name of the monster. It's the name of the person.
Well, that's what I mean. It's like we're already bastardizing it, so we may as well just...
I think this bastardization, it came to a head when we started adapting Magic the Gathering stuff for D&D, because Magic, and I believe this is the work of one James Wyatt, though I'm not 100% sure, is more mythologically accurate. And they're called Gorgons. in Magic the Gathering.
Right.
They're not identical to the way the Gorgon sisters work in Greek mythology, but at least they're not calling everything a medusa.
God, don't you mean gore guys?
Cool guys. Medusas and gore guys.
There you go. Well, with that, let us jump into a little bit of mop up. We got our bread. We're mopping up the soup of the news last week from the Monster Manual stuff. They announced lycanthropes will be monstrosities in the new D&D Monster Manual. Thank goodness. And I hope that, because we talked about this, whether, goblins are going to be fae. I don't think they've said for sure about hobgoblins or I guess orcs would remain humanoids at a guess. But are we going to get rid of the kind of sub-typing, the brackets typing? Because that was the thing that annoyed me about lycanthropes is they're humanoid shape changer, which if you wanted to use that tag for certain rules, it was just kind of a bit of it was a bit obscure. It was a bit buried in the rules.
Someone here may have been going through the Monster Hunter to make some changes based on that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say who.
That's true.
But yeah.
It's an interesting case where 5e's desire to use natural language abuts with its desire to be a system of rules, right? Because I think if you have a spell like Moonbeam that directly impacts shape changers, the question is, well, do you look for a creature that is a shape changer with a lowercase s, or do you now have to look for a shape changer with the capital S?
That is a good point. And what if it's the difference between a creature that changes shape as part of its stat block or a creature that has a spell in its stat block that allows it to change shape?
Right. Does it become a parentheses shape changer if it's using the spell shape change? And some of this is all common sense, right? As it always has been. But the more you try and codify your rule set, the more you start to fight against common sense sometimes.
I blame Tolkien. If he hadn't made Sting, then all of this would be fine.
Tell me more.
But we have to have a sword that glows, not in the presence of any humanoid, but in the presence of very specific humanoid.
Not
parentheses.
just evil.
Yes. Thanks, Tolkien.
Jeez, Tolkien, you ruined everything.
I bet this debate has been had online because I quite like Sting. Sting is something that really stuck in my head when I saw The Fellowship of the Ring, which I saw first as an 11-year-old. I didn't read the book first. And so when Sting glows blue in the Mines of Moria, when Frodo half draws it and it's blue, as an 11-year-old, I was like, things are about to go down. It just got serious in here. But what is is Sting just awfully judgy? How does Sting tell if goblins or orcs are near? And what does Sting have against goblins or orcs? Can Sting glow around Uruk-hai? Does Sting glow around Uruk-hai? Do we see that at Amon Hen? These questions demand answers.
In fact, the orcs it glows around in Moria are not even orcs as we would call them. They're goblins. They're not Mordor orcs and they're not Isengard Uruks. They're goblins. So Sting, I would think anything that has in 3rd edition terms a monstrous humanoid subtype might even glow around that. Bugbears, why not?
I just do what I instinctively feel I want to do.
I similarly, Ben was really grabbed by Sting, but from reading The Hobbit as a kid, because when you read The Hobbit, they find this sort of old stash of weapons and take a bunch of stuff, and then they go to Rivendell. It's very D&D. We had our little encounter. We found a stash of stuff. We took it to this wise magic guy, and he told us what the different magic items did. But it's very Bilbo is like, maybe mine is cool too, because he got the smallest sword or whatever. And then when you get the actual pre-goblin town attack, it's just very cool. It grabs the imagination as well. So I totally am on board with, we got to find a way to make it work. Boy, taxonomy. It just is hard.
Well, speaking of creature type, Christian Hoffer pointed out on EN World, and this hadn't occurred to me, maybe it had occurred to some other people, but if goblins and kobolds are having their creature type reclassified as fae and dragon, what does this mean for potential player characters in future that may take these species? Now, they're not in the core player's handbook, though they have been in previous publications, obviously. Wild Beyond the Witchlight, I wasn't fully aware of this, but fairies and Heragon were added as playable fae. Spelljammer added constructs, oozes, and monstrosities all as playable creatures. And Shawn, we even talked with the transformations, like should it change your creature type or not? And I think what we've got at the moment is that it does change your creature type to the specific thing. If you're a vampire, you become undead, but you don't lose humanoid.
Correct.
Is this a buff for certain creatures if Goblin becomes a playable species in a future publication and it's a fae? Is that a buff to that? Would people play it just to avoid getting charmed?
Yes and no. Right. Some people will play it because they want to play this cool thing and have cool stories to tell with it. And some players are going to say, what can keep me from getting charmed? Or what can keep me from being, most importantly, the whole person spell, right? So I'm going to play that simply for that reason. You get all kinds. And that's why make a rule that makes sense for the widest breadth of the audience and let go of the corner cases, because the corner cases will be there by definition of what a role-playing game is.
In my memory, I'm going to trust the brain's trust over here. There was a little bit of this that we saw happen with at least centaurs, where there was a playable centaur race, and then down the line, they republished, and this version was Fae and had the little Fae buffs. And I do remember a little period of time where people were very like, I choose the good new version of Centaur because the original was pretty crap. But you just didn't get anything. You just didn't get anything for being a Centaur because they were too worried about it being too good. But I think after that initial little buzz of like, ooh, this version's better than the other version, I think it always ends up being someone is making their character on D&D Beyond. They want to be a goblin. There's 6 different things that they could click to be a goblin, and they don't understand the difference between them. They just pick one. They just pick one, and it will be whichever one they happened to click because the interface was so overwhelming and they didn't want to deal with that anymore. They just wanted to be a little guy.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they continue to gate D&D Beyond, because at the moment everything's up there from 5e 2014, and will that continue to be a point of confusion for future players? It's currently marked as like origin or legacy content.
I've recently been in there messing around, and you can just click 2024 rules and it will filter out everything else.
Oh, okay, cool.
And it actually works. So that's great. And well, they're starting organized play campaigns now for 2024, including a new campaign called Legends of Greyhawk. And in the instructions for that campaign, it tells you how to create a character. And it very specifically says, when you go to D&D Beyond, check this, uncheck this, and you're set. And so I did it just to make sure, and it did bring up the correct choices. So right on, D&D Beyond, Wizards, something that you've communicated to each other is working, and we love to see that.
I'd love to see when it seems like everything has its right place, right? It feels like this house is in such disarray most of the time, and probably because we're in the process of changing editions without changing platforms. But to see it coming together, even just a little bit, makes me happy. I played a non-D&D RPG last night with 3 people who had never, ever played an RPG before at all. And I saw so many different flavors of newbie at that table. I saw the one who got it instantly and was making plans like, okay, so you've got a grappling hook and I can transform my weapon into repair tools. And it's like, the puzzle solver. I saw one person who was kind of a wallflower and just hanging around listening, waiting for other people to talk and maybe making a joke every now and then. And one person who it seemed like he was really trying to engage, but just could not make heads nor tails of the character sheet. Like he kept looking back in the book and going through, and it's like, oh, I can do all of these things, but I don't understand them at all, right? And making a system that accommodates all of those people, right? That gives enough depth to the person who wants to problem solve with every little minute item on their character sheet, and also just is simple and straightforward enough for the person who cannot grok any of it at all. I don't envy them the task of making a perfect interface for all of those people. I do think it's possible. Some combination of drop-down menus and expanding trees and big, colorful buttons that are like, do this if you want to attack, right? Just make it as simple as possible and then open it up from there. I think it's doable.
I'm fascinated that the organized play rules for the Greyhawk campaign, Shawn, include instructions specifically for D&D Beyond. And my question is, without having seen them, does it assume that the user is using D&D Beyond? Are there instructions for like doing a manual physical character sheet?
Not yet. I am not privy to all of the information going on behind the scenes there.
Sure.
So Wizards is going to want people to use D&D Beyond because duh. However, I can tell you from experience that Baldman Games generally runs these campaigns at conventions. And if you show up with a character sheet and say, I made my character, chances are pretty good that they're not going to say, I'm sorry, you didn't use D&D Beyond, please go away. They're going to say, hey, let me see the character. Oh, okay, you're good. Have a seat. Everybody have fun. Because Baldman Games is about getting people in seats and having fun. After the game, maybe they'll say, you know what, you created this character and you're using these rules from 2014. This character, this campaign uses 2024 rules. Hey, why don't you go to D&D Beyond? It's free to create an account. You can use the free basic rules and you can create your character there. So it's not like you are going to be lined up and shamed for, well, you should be, but no. You will be able to have a fun game, and you will find helpful people generally at these conventions if you go to a place that is run by organizations like Baldman Games or Gamehole Con, where they're there to help you, not to be the rules enforcement team.
Is the assumption, though, kind of turning in terms of players turning up at tables that they'll have a D&D Beyond character or they'll have a manual physical character sheet? Like, is there more of an expectation one way or the other?
I can't give you a better answer than I just gave. Wizards of the Coast will want you to use D&D Beyond.
Yeah, okay, gotcha.
Because then everything is right there. They're selling stuff on D&D Beyond that they want you to buy, obviously.
Sure.
So it's been this way since the beginning of organized play that I can remember. It's, hey, use this, do this. We'd love you to do this. But in reality, people at these conventions, they just want everyone to sit down and have fun playing a game.
The last bit of interesting news on the Monster Manual itself being that alignment in stat blocks has kind of been put back in, I suppose, or they've dropped the quote unquote typical clarifier that had been written before creature alignment in earlier publications. I believe Monsters of the Multiverse did this, where it would say goblins are typically evil. That's a made-up example. I don't know if that's exactly true, but certain creature types are typically chaotic evil, typically good, whatever it happens to be. They've dropped that clarifier. Basically, it sounds like to save words and space within the stat block itself. And within the rules, if you will, for alignment, they have said, a creature's alignment is typically what is said in the stat block, but alignment is descriptive, not prescriptive.
I think this is a great change, honestly. From both an editorial and a game philosophy standpoint. From editorial standpoint, it saves words. Great. That's the end of that conversation. And, if you look in a 3rd edition Monster Manual, you'll see a grade of alignments being given. You'll see always, typically, and I think there's a 3rd option that is much more wishy-washy. But ultimately, 5th edition streamlined that, and maybe even 4th edition before it, streamlined that into alignment, stamp, there it is. But frankly, all of the information in a stat block is typically anyway. You could up its defense, you could up its HP, you could up its attack, you could up its damage. All of this is there for you to play with. And in fact, this is an example, right? And moreover, it's an example of a creature that you're probably intended to fight. So what does the alignment try and show you? Well, it tries to show you the one that's most likely to want to get in your face and stab you. And if that means it says, goblin, chaotic evil, then it's like, okay, well, cool. These goblins that are here to stab you are probably chaotic evil. And then look at a book like Monsters of the Multiverse, which goes so far in the other direction. It's like these goblins are, they are from the Feywild, and they have this long and interesting and complex history of being, slaves of an evil warrior god who basically ransacked them from their homeland. It's like, okay, well, here's some pathos, here's some complexity in a book that is specifically about the pathos and complexity of these creatures. Whereas a Monster Manual, truly, it's a book full of things that you will probably want to kill your players with.
Not to rehash a boring argument from the internet that comes back and cycles around all the time. But can anyone here explain to me, mechanically speaking, purely mechanically speaking, why we still need alignment on monster stat blocks?
There's no reason.
Thank you, Dael. I wasn't even going to get worked up enough to say it, but you stepped in and I appreciate it.
There is I can think of an example from 2014. Whether that example will continue to stick or not, I'm not sure. And to talk to the pure mechanics, it is the Rakshasa stat block was vulnerable only to piercing weapons wielded by a good aligned character. And I believe there might be a magic item that was like, does extra damage against evil aligned creatures. And I find that, like, from a mythological context, there's something like Sting glowing blue in the presence of orcs. There's something very mythologically evocative about the idea of like a weapon that is designed specifically to fight evil, does damage to evil, but mechanically that seems to hook more into creature type than it does into alignment when it's used in the rules.
I just very quickly, I'm not picking a fight with Ben. Ben is right. That's a good example of a place where it is useful and interesting. Folks in chat, a bunch of people are bringing up like Paladin, Divine Sense, Detect Good and Evil, Protection for Good and Evil. This happened when I made my video on alignment as well. That's not what those spells do.
No,
that's
not what
those
they do
things
anymore.
do. That's not what they do anymore. They used to,
Yep.
they don't do that anymore. So why are we still doing it? Because the thing that gets me all worked up about this is, and will continue to be, that we're pretty much always, there's clearly exceptions, as Ben just brought up, but we're typically, hey, there we go, dealing with either creatures that are not intelligent enough to have a sense of morality. I wouldn't call a tiger evil for killing whatever it is tigers eat. Or we're dealing with an intelligent species, at which point it's typically going to be more complicated than just they are usually evil. Like, I just think that it is so superfluous to me, and I don't know if we want to save words. Let's save some freaking words. I don't know.
This is a case actually. If I remember right, we did this in Teldor Reborn over at Darrington Press. We just cut the alignment entirely. It was large, giant, and then nothing afterward. And I'll tell you what, it was a good change. Wizards should do it also, but it does make that metadata line look a little shrimpy. It does look like there should be something after there.
That's just because you're used to seeing it.
Exactly. Well, there's a great Matt Colville video, actually, where he talks about the origins of law and chaos in terms of D&D, basically as being teams, right? From D&D's origin as a war game, your alignments were, what cosmic force you were aligned with. It didn't really say anything about your morality, except sort of by implication. But it meant that if you had some neutral evil Yugoloths and some lawful evil hobgoblins, then they would get along on the basis of their evil, but they would have some sort of factionalized disagreements based on their law and chaos alignment. And so it would basically be what pals could you have in your army, essentially, which I think is an interesting concept, especially if you're playing a war game, which if you're playing D&D, you're not playing a war game, as much as it might seem like it sometimes.
Yeah, I don't think I would. Look, I am the proclaimer, not the only one. I don't mean to pedestal myself, but I will proclaim that alignment should be descriptive, not prescriptive. It should describe a character based on their actions and beliefs, then be prescribed to them by some cosmic force or birthright or something like that. Which is difficult because at what point does a creature change alignment if their actions change? Is it from the first time they murder someone? Is it from the third time? Like, how much evil outweighs good? These are all sticky questions that are difficult to make mechanics around, but I love playing with them in a thematic sense when I play role-playing games like D&D. And so I like keeping alignment around and giving it occasional mechanical heft, such as this weapon does extra damage to an evil-aligned creature. I suppose kind of to explore what the mechanics say about the character involved. Like, if a sword can only be wielded by a good character, and then your paladin the sword goes white hot and your paladin drops it, and every time they try to pick it up, they can't pick it up now. What does that say about the paladin's actions?
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's some DM fiat going into that. Obviously, that's like, well, who's the DM to judge if this player is role-playing a good or evil character? And that's fair, but that's part of the dialogue that you have at the table. You know, maybe the DM says, look, I'm not judging you, but the sword is judging you, just like how, I'm not trying to kill you, the monsters are. And that creates role-play opportunities to, like, what does the paladin do to then redeem themselves? Anyway, it's an imperfect thing to use as a mechanic that creates amazing role-playing moments.
Except when it doesn't. I have been through 5 3/4 editions now, and so many times the game has devolved into, I am good. No, you did an evil thing. That wasn't evil. Oh, but you're chaotic. You just did a lawful thing, so therefore you are now lawful. But no, I can't be a chaotic, or I can't be a barbarian unless I'm chaotic, 3rd edition or 2nd edition. So therefore you're not a barbarian anymore. But wait, what did I do? Just because I politely pushed in someone's chair doesn't mean I'm lawful. It just happened that I pushed in their chair. Well, no, that's lawful, because a chaotic person would have picked up the chair and smashed someone. No, that's evil. That's not chaotic. Well, what does chaotic mean? Let's go back to Plato and let's start talking about all of the ethics and morals. And then 7 hours later, you're like, you know what we should do is we should play a game and have some fun and roll some dice. So that's why I would get rid of alignment. I'm chaotic like that, Ben. I'm chaotic and evil like that.
It's too much to ask. To ask.
It's been clear through many discussions, but Shawn and I play in very different tables and in very different styles. Because, look, I completely agree with you, and I see exactly how that kind of interaction would play out. It's kind of like you have to be signed up to want to discuss Plato through playing role-playing games, which everybody is not going to be on board for. And that's not to say that one way of playing role-playing game, that's not to put a qualitative statement on whether one way or the other is better. It's just what people prefer.
Ben was kind of moving like a Muppet just then. And I just wanted to highlight that.
You should check out the YouTube. Actually, if you're listening on Spotify, you can see the video. Just pop open your phone, pull over first, or dry your hands, whichever it is. Speaking of alignments, the other bit of news this week aligns with the industry, because it's about a comic book distribution company. Are you still with us? All right, let's do this. Diamond Comic Distributors, who are responsible, or were responsible, I should say, for most of the distribution of comic books to mum and pop stores, but probably also online retailers, I assume. Basically, they're responsible for getting the comics from the publishers who print the comics and then distributing them all out to the stores where you purchase them from your local retailer. If you're not purchasing direct from the publisher themselves via direct sales. Diamond have been around for decades now. They had a virtual monopoly on comic book distribution within the United States prior to 2020. And then during the next few years, for whatever reason, mysterious, their monopoly started to break up a little bit, I believe, when Marvel and DC, two of the obviously biggest comic book printers, went elsewhere for their distribution. And Diamond have since kind of fallen on financially rough times. They have recently filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is not that they're completely gone under yet. It just protects them from their creditors who they owe money to and provides them time to restructure their company. Diamond citing losses from kind of post-pandemic declines, rising costs, and losing major publishers such as Marvel for their decline and needing to declare Chapter 11. How is this relevant to tabletop RPGs, I hear you ask? Well, Diamond owns, or possibly owned at this point, Alliance Game Distributors, which was at least partly responsible for the store distribution of tabletop RPG and board game publishers, manufacturers such as Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, the National Entertainment Collectibles, which I believe were associated with or owned WizKids, Catalyst Game Labs, who were responsible for Shadowrun, Battletech, and a host of other companies. And because Diamond is going under, they are trying to sell off Alliance Game Distributors to be able to, as part of their restructure. Canadian company Universal Distribution, who is a peer to Diamond, have made what is referred to as a stalking horse bid to purchase Alliance from Diamond. A stalking horse bid is a term that basically means they've put in a bid, and that's kind of the floor of what other people can bid to purchase Alliance from Diamond. If you're still with us, what does this mean for you, tabletop RPG consumer and or tabletop RPG game store owner? What it means is that there may be disruption and slowdown to the distribution of stock for tabletop RPG and board game stock, which means there may be lower availability within local retail stores, because Diamond is obviously going, or I should say Alliance, the game distributors are going through a bit of a period of whether they'll be purchased or not, which could result in shortages of stock if you're after something specific. And it could also result in sales issues for smaller stores who can't get that stock in. So look, hopefully this is going to pass without many consumers really noticing it. But, you know, support local, I suppose. If there's something you've had your eye on, maybe grab it now just in case. And then on the publisher side of things, you know, most major publishers probably, though they will be disgruntled, will be fine. Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro are owed collectively $2 million from Diamond, which, you know, I'm sure they will absolutely feel. But smaller independent game makers that are also using these distribution channels could have a little bit of struggle as they're trying to get their games out to people. We don't know who those companies are because a lot of this information is not public knowledge in terms of who uses what distribution channels. Importantly, it does not affect Kickstarter projects. So in terms of Kickstarters being fulfilled and distributed, anything that is coming directly from a Kickstarter that you backed will not be affected by this.
I've never been stalked by a horse.
What even is a horse stalking bid?
I'll take that as a question because I did discover this. So it dates back to kind of like hunting, I suppose, you know, deer, buffalo, whatever it happens to be, where you walk behind your horse to conceal the fact that you are there until you are able to get close enough to hunt the thing you are hunting.
Would the thing you're hunting not be troubled by the horse? I mean, that's not a problem for you. You didn't invent the term or the method.
No, that's correct.
Apparently, there is some benefit in being this bidder, in that even if you lose the bid, since you were the first one to step forward, there is a benefit to you financially to be the first one to make this bid. You get a percentage of the sale or something strange like that.
Just like the horses.
Exactly.
It all makes sense.
As it goes, find out who makes the media you love, get it in physical print media, and support them as directly as you possibly can. You know, this stuff will continue to happen. This is not the first and it won't be the last. So find who the author is, find where their web shop is, find their Etsy store or their Redbubble or whatever it is, and make sure you buy from them.
Speaking of losing things, we have a listener email. Dael, where would they email?
Well, Ben Byrne, they could email podcast@ghostfiregaming.com.
Perfect. We haven't said that in a while. So if you have an email, make sure to send it in like Rupert did. And Rupert asked us the opposite of a question we very often answer, which is how to get more players. Rupert's asking how to lose players and alienate people. Rupert plays with a group of 8, which all agree is too large, and would rather kind of pare the group down. But it is difficult splitting down a group that you feel is too large because it can feel very exclusionary to the players who don't get included. They've tried splitting the group in half, but it's kind of felt like there's a bit of an A team and a B team. So have you ever had this issue? Have you ever had to say goodbye to a player? I'm assuming for the purposes of this conversation, it's not because anybody did anything particularly wrong. It's not how to get rid of a problem player, but just how to, you know, not feel like you're excluding people and yet getting to a group size that's a bit more comfortable for everyone.
Well, one player becomes the stalking horse and they bid on a place at the table. And, you know, the bidding starts at $100. And, you know, and then we go up from there. That's Rupert, you've just solved your problem and made a little money on the side. Honestly, the question I have is it because there are too many players or is it because there are too many characters? And there's a difference. Is it too much room? I mean, like there's physically not enough room, or is it because 7 characters are too many for you to everyone get their turn? Because one thing that you could do, and this will probably not fly for people, is play a different game. There are going to be many games out there where 7 players are fine because turns are shorter, because the flow is differently, the game loop plays differently, and you could accommodate 7 players easily. Now, that might be a non-starter because people want to play 5e D&D. And I will step back and let people go from there.
See, I feel like I'm not going to have particularly useful things to say because I have more questions. I did read the full email. I have more questions because I want to understand, like, are the A team and B team playing on different nights? Is there a hierarchy in the A team, B team? Are there multiple GMs in the group or just one GM in the group? How are we splitting it? Are they playing different campaigns, or is it like Fellowship of the Ring, split the characters up but keep playing the same storyline but in different subgroups? Like, I just have a lot of questions about those things because I don't think that it doesn't immediately register to me why it would feel like you're isolating people by splitting the group up and running separate games, rather than because you're not splitting the group and only running for you know what I mean? So I do have more questions. I think Shawn's idea is a great one, far better than mine. The only other thing that comes to my mind is that my brother has been in a gaming club since like mid high school, where they regularly, it's, go to the local YMCA or whatever, and you the PCYZ, whatever it may be, and you just sort of find a big room, and these people are playing Vampire the Masquerade over here. These 2 are playing Warhammer 40K. This little group are doing Call of Cthulhu, and it's all still a communal event with everyone sort of in the same space, but you're still doing your smaller individual things. That's the only thing that kind of immediately comes to my mind.
The weirdest thing was when you said that little group over in the corner, I knew it was going to be Call of Cthulhu. I don't know. That little group over in the corner, they're
like,
always playing
Call of Cthulhu vibes.
It is. It's totally reasonable.
I would recommend, and this is my thought, but I've been saving it because chat has been talking about it a lot as well, is to try out the ever talked about but rarely done West Marches style of play. That's the classic example people go to when you have too many people. It's definitely a playstyle shift, especially if you're doing it true West Marches style, which is the players schedule the game and whatever players can show up when they want to show up, you just go for it. I think that's a style that better suits clubs in college or whatever, when everyone has, or at least when your DM has a lot of free time. But another example is this: ask the players which ones really want to be playing D&D and which ones are just here to hang out. Given the way that our question asker said something about, they split the group but it didn't feel right, I think you may be unfortunately blessed with too many players who actually really love D&D. But for people who are not the question asker, who may be suffering from a similar issue, it will be a great situation, because I would say on the whole, probably 30 to 60% of every D&D group doesn't really care that they're playing D&D. They could be playing any RPG as long as their friends are there and having fun.
They could be playing Uno.
Yeah, they could be playing, Candyland, for God's sake. They could be watching football. We get so precious about D&D here as real D&D heads, but it's about the people.
Not those fake D&D heads.
Those D&D feet, those D&D arms.
One of my favorite campaigns I ever played in had this particular problem. And what the game master did was ran 3 of us or 4 of us one night a week, this other group the other night, but we were playing the same adventure. And it was Undermountain. So our group would go into Undermountain and we'd explore and we'd clear 3 rooms and we'd find treasure. And we'd say, oh, up there, the next room, well, we have to leave and rest. But that next room, we know there's 7 goblins there. We'll come back and get them next time. And we come back the next week, and those 7 goblins that were in that room, we find their dead bodies looted. And we're like, oh boy, what happened? And then we realized that there were 2 groups playing, and they were doing the things, but the dungeon was changing as we went. And then we finally, at some point, came together for a game. And then we started intermingling the 2 different groups. And it worked out interestingly. The other thing I've seen done, this is pretty strange, but bear with me, is if it's a problem with we need 4 or 5 characters, not 7. Have 2 people play the same character, and you can do that either as just they discuss something and then they decide together how to act, or they're not, and one head and the other head, have to get along, and so that you only have one character. So you only have 5 people initiative, and you only have 5 actions that go on during the round. But you can have the players who are sharing a character come up with this cool story about why they're 2 people, 2 spirits within the same body.
Do a whole Pacific Rim campaign where it's just you're just drift compatible sharing the Jaeger.
Yeah, and it takes work, and it takes a bit of understanding and acceptance. But when it works, it gets everybody involved, and it adds something to the game rather than detracting from the game.
It's just building on that. A couple of episodes ago, we talked about like playing a familiar of another character as potentially a way to sort of play the same character. But but some players who they're not there for the deep character sheet. How many abilities do I have and how many spells can I cast? They're quite happy to have their like one attack or whatever. But they can fly because they're playing an imp, let's just say that, they get their little fun thing, but they're functionally 2 characters, 2 players playing the same character. I also enjoy that our advice is like, it's too hard to lose players. Get more players. Get a which I think is actually like
start a gaming club.
Like literally that might be a great solution. Go ahead, Dael.
No, that actually that sounded exciting at the end. That sounds really fun. You should start a gaming club. That's the answer. Get more players. You could also, look, you can build a campaign around the idea of we have too many players. We have to do this on a roster system. And you can do, I don't know, there's that game that I've been talking about forever that I will never run. That is, you are a monster hunting mercenaries guild, and different teams get sent out at different times, and you can just have different little combinations of each of the players, West Marches style, go out on the different adventures, but then have a Discord server where you do your text posts, play by post role play in the meantime, so people who don't go out on that mission that week can still play as their characters back at base, doing their conversation and social play, or building their robot that they, I don't know. I think the best solution for you is going to be bespoke to what you and your players like and the kind of campaigns that you want to run. So we can only help you so much.
Yeah, Dael just described an organized play campaign when it's really working well. The characters that are together at that time are doing the adventure because they're together at that time, but the world is still out there. You can still interact with that world even if you're not at the table.
Good luck to you, Rupert.
Godspeed.
Speaking of alignment and whether you can still pick up the evil sword, I'm going to jump down to Felix's question, which is at the bottom of the run sheet, just because I think that ties into a little bit of the conversation that Shawn and I were having earlier around alignment and making it a mechanical effect that can affect a player character in a way the player might not want. And Felix's question is asking how to insert character-altering effects into your campaign. If you do, are they ever a good idea? The examples that Felix provided being make a deal with a devil that turns the character into a tiefling, getting possessed so that the personality of the character is forcibly altered, making a pact, so getting a forced level in Warlock. They can be novel, memorable moments for a campaign, but take away from player agency, and flagging them can detract from the surprise and mystery if you kind of preempt it a little bit and say hey, someone's going to have this happen to them, can make it seem a bit contrived, perhaps.
2 words. Well, actually 1 word and 1 number. The first word is session, and the second number is 0.
Yes, 100%.
It's a great idea when it's a great idea, right, James?
Yeah. Sorry, I feel like I'm talking over you, Shawn.
No, do it.
Let's go. Ben, the question asker kind of preempted our easy session 0 answer, but I want to dig into that because there's sort of this implication that talking about it beforehand ruins the potency of a surprise. And perhaps to a degree that is true. But there are things that can reinvigorate the surprise. And one of the best ways to do that is to have time between asking for, let's be real here, consent, and then, draw out the suspense of something wild happening in the campaign a little bit. Establish the ground rule from the very beginning. Wild character changing things can happen here. Are you totally on board with it? Even if it happens well after we say this happens. I'm like, yes, I'm cool. Then, normal D&D campaign, bam, weird magical shit happens. And then, you have gotten everybody's sign on, and then something wild happens. And the surprise is there. And there's one final thing here. It's the the item from the 2024 DMG that has been roundly mocked on certain elements of the internet. If something too wild and crazy happens, X. Put your arms over your head in a big round X, and you don't have to do it like that. That's the part that got made fun of. Say, wait a minute. Hold on. Pause. This actually sucks. I'm really actually not having a good time right now. And ideally, you've got a group of people around you who are, good people and who are willing to entertain this notion of this surprise actually worsened my fun rather than enhanced it. And ideally, you're a secure enough person who is able to sit with the feeling of, oh, that sucked for a little bit before you're like, you don't make a mountain out of a molehill. Is what I really mean to say. If something really sucked, it actually really ruins your fun, go for it. But hopefully you're not the kind of person whose fun is ruined by something not going your way all the time. Which is, I think, the territory that people who like to make wild arguments about D&D on the internet typically live in.
I would like to call attention to a moment from campaign 1 of Critical Role. When they are fighting, that was good, more Muppety. They are fighting a Sphinx, and the Sphinx has an effect that hits Laura Bailey's character, Vex, who starts to age. She rapidly ages. And it's not in like, oh, you're an old woman now, but her character ages like 10 years or something in this moment. And Laura just goes like, no, like she's reacting to it. And after a couple of moments of her going, no, like it wasn't silly, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't Xing, it wasn't stopping the game and saying, hey, this isn't fun for me. But there were just a couple of comments. And after those couple of comments, Matt Mercer clearly went, oh, she hates that. And he undid it in the story. He just like, by the end of the fight, he's like, the Sphinx undoes it. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. And I say this as a person who, I freaking love checking in major character altering stuff. I love it happening to me. We all know my elf character who got the ruby arm. I love doing that to my players. My beholder that I run is, you can come out of that fight with like an accidental level in aberrant warlock. Like there are just like weird things that happen and that can permanently change your character. I run the major injuries table that can, you have an amputation or whatever. I love that stuff. The way that I would run it is that I would have it happen in the moment. And then after the fact, like if it was a big planned narrative thing, sure, I would ahead of time just say, hey, I'm thinking of having this thing happen in the next session. How do you feel about that? I love doing that before a session, saying, hey, just plan for this thing. It'll surprise everyone else. You and me, we're in cahoots. Or if it's a surprise, like in a beholder fight or something, just after the session go, hey, just for the record, do you want that to be a permanent thing? Or do you want us to like build into the next session, getting rid of that? Like you could have it be this big, permanent, exciting, surprising moment and then also take it back. You could have your cake and eat it too. It's just a game.
Ask the question at the start of the campaign, DMs. Ask the player, do you have a vision for your character level 1 through 10 or 1 through 20? Do you see the story and the mechanics of the character? And have you planned all that out? If so, would you be upset if that changed in some way? And if they say yes, then right then, don't mess with their character. But if you do, make it something that's fun or potentially fun. Make it something that's fun thematically. Make it something that's fun dramatically. Make it something that's fun mechanically. Make it something fun that the player gets to interact with instead of just blah. Now you're this other thing and there's nothing. That's just it. Make it something that an engaged, fun-loving, interested player would want to do. And if only there were rules to say, like, turn into a vampire or a werewolf.
I was going to bring up transformations.
That would be great to do all of those things and have it already baked into the rules.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, transformations we've talked about are a journey. It's kind of giving the players an extra thing that they get to their character that, as you said, was fun.
It's giving them an extra thing more often than taking away makes it really fun and exciting. Give them, don't swap out their levels for Warlock. Give them an extra level, and that level is in Warlock. You know what I mean? Give them something. It's a little present.
You've just reminded me of a campaign we ran ages ago where a character made a pact. They were playing a bard, but was actually playing a wizard-like character who was more like a warlock, because the idea was that their bard knew words of power was how they cast their magic, but they had studied those words like a wizard, but the words came from a Cthulhu monster like a warlock. And then they got an extra level, but I didn't tell any of the other players. And one of the other players who is very like, what's on everybody else's character sheet? What can everybody else do so that we can work as a team? Couldn't work out how this player had extra abilities, and it was really doing his head in. Dada, you can cut this out. It's just a funny little anecdote from my campaign. But like for sessions, he was like, "How can you do that? What do you? That's not." Anyway, sorry. Go ahead, Shawn.
Well, that's the thing. Another thing you can do is you can gamify the actual changes. So think of the question asks about like a change, getting possessed, so your personality is altered. Gamify it so that, let's just say the gods are somehow struck down from the heavens and their essences go into mortals, the time of troubles in the Forgotten Realms sort of thing. And every player gets a god or goddess that has inhabited them. Gamify it so that the players are encouraged to role play this new thing. And at the end of a session or at the end of two, everyone has to try to guess what gods are inhabiting the other players. So you have to role play it. But if everyone guesses because it was so obvious, you don't get anything. But if no one gets it right, you don't get anything. But if one or more, but not all of the players guess correctly, you get a boon of some kind. So not only are you doing this fun thing of having everyone role play as the essence of a god or goddess, you're gamifying it to make it a game within the game. And I've heard that role-playing players like games. I may be wrong, but I've heard a rumor.
You keep trying to put fun and games into D&D, Shawn. What is that about?
Stop.
This is an interesting point you bring up about fun and games, because when I talk to other DMs and I say, hey, what stories excite you to run D&D? They bring up stories that are typically not very fun for the characters that are in them. Like Arcane is a big inspiration for a lot of people right now. I don't think anyone in that show is having fun. And yet it's dramatic as hell. It's so fun to watch. And that's because we are not them. But in a D&D game, you are them, at least a little bit. And so you either need to be, sort of in a directorial view above your character, looking down on them, almost sort of third person style, or you need to be at least a little bit of a sicko who loves having terrible things happen to your character.
Well, I don't know whether this is true of me. Maybe I'm just exposing myself, but I don't know about you. When you were a kid and you were playing pretend, right? I certainly was always like, there's got to be dead parents. There's got to be kidnappings. You've been kidnapped. There's got to be, the woman who runs the orphanage mistreats you terribly. Like, it's got to be miserable. That was my form of play, and it's still.
Did you read a lot of Charles Dickens? Is that?
I did. I don't know where I got it from.
Okay.
Clearly all that. I was about to ask, is Batman to blame for the dead parents trope? But clearly not.
Surely not.
I think popularized it maybe for the modern audience, you could argue, but it's part of the hero's journey, right? Like Frodo's parents are dead, aren't they? When at the start of Lord of the Rings.
I just love drama. But it's also worth mentioning. It's worth mentioning that a lot of people, even if, like I talked about, give it to them as a gift, it's an extra thing you get. There are a lot of people who hate that as well. It is about what their vision is for their character. And even if you give them a special extra thing as a gift, they might hate that. So it is still worth doing your session zeros, trying to get in tune with your players and what different players want, and trying to sort of keep on top of monitoring how they're feeling about different stuff. Yeah.
Well, in addition to session zeros, and we might have mentioned this earlier in this discussion, but just to say it explicitly is it's worth doing like check-ins, like your session zero doesn't have to be at the start of the game and then you never talk about it again. If you say in the first session, I want to put transformations into this game, I don't want to say what transformations they're going to be because I'd prefer it to happen organically. Maybe you get bitten by a werewolf, maybe you don't, let's see how the combat goes if you fight werewolves. Oh, mystery. And then one of the characters ends up, let's just say, with a vampire transformation or an aberrant horror transformation. And you check in with them afterwards and you go like, is this still fun for your character? And they're like, oh, actually, aberrant horror is just like, I prefer gothic horror. I didn't think this was what you meant. Can we find a way to cure this? And you're like, yep, sure. In game, let's find a way to cure it. And we have those suggestions in the new versions of the transformation. Some of them say cannot be cured. That doesn't mean you as the GM can't find a way if you want to. And the other example of this, kind of going of what you were saying, Dael, is that I have a player who loves disadvantages. They had a heat weapon cast on a mace or a hammer by another player, and they thought, oh, my mace is magic now. And I was describing how they were taking damage and it was burning their hands. And after that combat, they said, can all my attacks be with disadvantage now until my burned hands heal? And I was like, you don't have to, but sure, if that's what you want to do. And he's like, yeah, my character fully believes this mace is now magical, so I want my hands to have to heal because I'm not going to stop using it. The flip side, I had a character die, and the player said, I'd rather my character not die. Can we just have them lose a limb or something? I'm like, yep, no problem. You come back, you've lost an arm, but hey, you're playing an artificer. Let's have you rebuild your arm so that you can get use of it back again over a couple of sessions. And instead of trying to really crunch the mechanics of like crafting in D&D 2014 in particular, every couple of sessions I would just say, all right, where's your arm at? Like, what would be fun for you? And they'd be like, okay, let's say it's like basically a glorified grabber, those crash grabber things. So I can't use it to lift like a weapon, but I can just use it to like pick things up. And I'm like, all right, great. Another couple sessions go by. Where is it at now? Okay, now it's a full like mechanical arm. Great. Couple sessions later, now it's a flamethrower. Whoa! Maybe we do some ability checks there. But yeah, so checking in repeatedly to make sure it is still fun for the players, even if they're down for kind of character.
Yeah.
And that silence means it's the end of the episode. We have reached the end. If you've enjoyed this episode, give it a like, give it some stars. If you're on Twitch, I don't know, follow. I don't know what Twitch has. I'm not good at Twitch, but thank you for hanging out. You can come hang out on Twitch at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Man, I'm getting my times all mixed up. It is 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific on a Monday. Or if you're in Australia on the East Coast, 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. Everybody else in Perth, I don't know what the time is there at the moment, but good luck to you. And good luck to us. I've been Ben Byrne.
Is it 8 a.m.?
Probably.
I'm going to say I'm right.
All right. 7 a.m. West Coast. Damn, we were close. Anyway, I've been Ben Byrne here with Shawn Merwin, James Hake, Dael Kingsmill. We will be back next week. So we'll see you then with another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. I guess I should say.
There it is. Eldritch Lorecast.
Yeah. You gotta wait for that.
You gotta say the Eldritch. You gotta say the Eldritch.
You gotta say the Eldritch Lorecast.
You gotta say it.
You can't not.
Eldritch Lorecast.
Lorecast. Eldritch Lorecast. The ELZ.
Give me my butterbuds, people. Give me the butt.
You gotta say the butter.
We can't just replace the butt with something else. We got a system
Gotta
here.
say it. Gotta do it. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba.